All right, for lecture 2, we're just going to dive in here and we're going to start with the male reproductive system. The male reproductive system tends to be a little bit simpler than the female reproductive system, but nevertheless, both reproductive systems are pretty intricate and highly independent of one another. So there's lots of interesting things to learn about both. All right, so I kind of cut off part of my picture here, but that picture's from your textbook. From lecture 1, I said that the idea here is that our gametes, our sex cells, are going to be performing the work here. And so sperm cells are the gamete that arises from males. Remember that gametes have 23 chromosomes. So like from lecture 1, when I did your picture here, what resulted were 4 cells each with 1 chromatid, also called a chromosome, and each of these are haploid or have 23 in them. Okay, and granted, I don't have my different colors here, but this chromatid, this chromosome has genes from mom and dad, these have genes from mom and dad, these have genes from mom and dad, and so on and so forth, because that crossing over occurred in meiosis 1. The interesting thing is from sperm cells, which we're going to get to, is that one round of meiosis 1 and 2 results in 4 viable sperm cells. That's going to be different when we get to the female. 2 rounds of meiosis will only end up with 1 egg that's going to be viable. But males, it's exponentially larger. You can result in 4 healthy sperm cells that are capable of fertilization. So when you look at the structure of sperm here, there's a head, looks like this. It's kind of round, oval shaped. At the very tip of the head here in this darker shade, that's called the acrosome. And there are a lot of enzymes located in that area. That is what penetrates the egg wall when fertilization occurs. And that chemical reaction signals, puts out signals in that egg wall that no other sperm can fertilize that egg. So actually, once 1 sperm arises at the egg, that's it. No other sperm can penetrate that egg. And that's good, because if it could, right, then we'd have 23 chromosomes from the egg, 23 chromosomes from the first sperm, 23 chromosomes from the second sperm, and that's way too many chromosomes, right? That's way more than 46. The mid piece here has a lot of mitochondria in them. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, so that's going to use ATP that will flap this tail, and that's the mobility piece of the sperm. So sperm are swimmable, right? We say they can swim. The idea is that they swim through the female reproductive tract to reach the egg. That is the end goal. So how are sperm formed? Through meiosis 1, meiosis 2. So here again, we've got we have 46 chromosomes, each with 2 chromatids, right? Those have replicated. They have paired up, and so here's a pair here, here's a pair here. So maybe this one's from mom, this one's from dad, this one's from mom, this one's from dad. Maybe this is chromosome 12, this is chromosome 14. Ultimately, those are going to be pulled to opposite sides of the cell, so that we have 1 copy of chromosome 12 and 14 here, 1 chromosome of 12 and 14 here. Then those are going to split into their single chromatids, each with 23 chromosomes, so that when this genetic material from the sperm meets up with similar genetic material from the egg, then the resulting cell will have these 46 chromosomes in the primary spermatocyte if it's a little boy, right, a boy baby. And then that will all happen again, or it would be an egg if it was a female. But ultimately, spermatogenesis is the formation of new sperm. It takes about 65 to 75 days start to finish. So that's very quick compared to female oogenesis, which we'll talk about. Begins with that stem cell, which is 46 chromosomes. And this occurs during puberty. So all of these meiotic divisions in a little boy are going to occur during puberty when they are now sexually able to reproduce. It's going to depend on testosterone. And during puberty, there's a surge of testosterone in males that allows this to kind of propel this process to happen. And ultimately, what we get, spermatids, same thing as sperm cells here, We get, each of those have 23 chromosomes. From one stem cell, we're going to get 4 spermatids coming out of that. Males can produce 400 million a day. That is insane, right? That is so many sperm cells. So there's tons more sperm than there are eggs. Why? We only need 1 egg to do fertilization. Sperm are not smart by any means. And so millions of sperm are going to be ejaculated into the female reproductive tract, and only 1 is going to win that egg. They're going to go all different directions. Some are going to die. Some, might just exit right away, right? You can't just put 1 sperm cell into the female reproductive tract and expect it to get to where it's going to go. So out of all, million of those that were ejaculated, 1 has got to have a chance, right? So all this occurs in the testes. These are the primary sex organs of the male. There are 2 testes. They are located in the scrotum, which is kind of a external sac that they sit in. Now in development, the testes and the ovaries all develop high up in the abdominal cavity, the lower abdominal cavity, and they're going to descend. Now it is super important that the testes descend to outside of the body. Reason is because at body temperature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, that is too warm for sperm to survive. And so testes need to be at a little bit cooler temperature. So they need to be hanging out outside the body a little bit, descended. If they do not descend, you do have infertility problems because your sperm are likely going to die before they are able to accomplish what they need to accomplish. So the testes, they're responsible for not only producing sperm, but also producing testosterone. That's produced in the testes as well. And that's what stimulates the descent of the testes, would be testosterone. So at puberty, right, the testes drop outside of the body, and therefore you will produce viable sperm at that point. If we were to look up a close cross section of the testes, so this is a close up of the testes, and then if we cut it open and look inside, you're going to have this kind of network here. All of these little stringy looking structures are called seminiferous tubules. That is where the maturing sperm are located. There's all this interstitial space between all of those tubules, and that is where testosterone is secreted from. So testosterone is necessary for sperm production, right? Very close by, right? So testosterone is released, goes right next door to the seminiferous tubules and stimulates sperm production. Each testes is divided into lobules. Here's a lobule here. So there's tons of these in here, right? So this is just a cross section of one of those seminiferous tubules. Sperm cells mature from the outer edge of the tubule to the inner lumen, the opening of that tubule. So here's the mature ones. Here are all of the spermatogonia, the stem cells out here. And then once we have these little mature sperm, they're pretty much mature. There's a little bit more maturation they need to undergo, but they're pretty darn close. Then they're going to go from the seminiferous tubules, they're going to go up to the structure that lies over the top of each testis. And there's this little glandular tissue that lays over the top of each testis called an epididymis. That is where sperm are going to be stored and then complete any maturation they need to before ejaculation. So from very immature to almost mature sperm here in the testes finish up their maturation here in the epididymis, and then they're stored until they're needed. The area that connects these two structures, the testes to the epididymis, is called rete testes. So those are just kind of little tubules that connect the two. So these little sperm here are going to travel through the seminiferous tubules up through the rete testes and hang out here in the epididymis. So that was our primary sex organ, was the testes. Now we have the epididymis. It sits over the top of the testes. That is where sperm are going to finish maturing and be stored. The sperm are non-motile at that point. They rely upon like peristaltic waves to move them around in there. Once those sperm are ready to be ejaculated, or when ejaculation happens, when arousal happens, Now the sperm are going to enter the ductus deferens, which the old term was vas deferens, if you've heard of that. Now we're in the ductus deferens, and that is going to pull sperm from the epididymis throughout the ductus deferens, and then we're going to get to our next stop here. I'm going to go into this here on this page. So here's our testes. Okay, sperm begin their development here. They're going to finish maturing here in the epididymis. Then as arousal happens, some contractions are going to pull these sperm through the ductus deferens, and this is a very long tube. So the ductus deferens is going to come around the bladder. Here's the urinary bladder right here, around the bladder to the back. And we're going to stop here for just a second. Now, we're going to hit up a bunch of accessory organs. The thing I want you to remember is that males are going to ejaculate, perform sexual activity, and urinate out the same tube. Females do those things out of different openings. And so this is where everything kind of comes together. And I think a theme of the semester, especially with the urinary and digestive tracts, is that we have this network of ducts and things that are all going to merge into one common duct and then kind of get the job done. So let's move on here. So we are here. Okay, now notice what happens here. We have this ductus deferens tube, but we also have this tube right here coming from this spongy looking structure. That structure is called the seminal vesicle. There's two, there's one on each side. That seminal vesicle secretes alkaline fluid. Alkaline means basic, so a higher pH. That's going to be important because the female vaginal canal is acidic, and those sperm are going to need to survive. They will die if it's too acidic, and so that kind of buffers that environment once those sperm enter the vaginal canal. The other thing that those do is secrete fructose and prostaglandins, which are a type of hormone. But the fructose is important because remember that sperm have mitochondria that produce ATP. ATP is produced from fructose. So that's an energy molecule that allows ATP to be yielded, and it allows those sperm to move. So essentially it's kind of like their food for their travel. So that the seminal vesicle is going to release that alkaline fluid and that fructose through this tube that's going to connect it to the ductus deferens, which is called the ejaculatory duct. So the ejaculatory duct comes off the seminal vesicle and meets up with the ductus deferens. Okay, this is the ejaculatory duct here. Now, this structure that we're in now, this yellow structure, this is called the prostate gland. Sits right below the urinary bladder. This tube right here coming from bladder down is going to be a urethra, right? That's called the prostatic urethra. I think we talked about that last module. So the prostatic urethra travels through the prostate gland. That's why men, if they have inflammation of their prostate, they find it very hard to urinate. Kind of pinches off that urethra. The ejaculatory duct is going to meet up with the prostatic urethra. And now we have the common tube in which ejaculation could happen or urination could happen. And there are mechanisms, there's like muscular contractions and a valve that will stop one from happening over the other. So you can't do both at the same time. But ultimately what we have is a common tube here. Now the prostate gland also contributes some fluid to that secretion. It's going to have citrates and as well as prostate specific antigen, which is a specific antigen that they can test for prostate cancer in your bloodstream. But ultimately it's providing more fluid again. So something to note that from the epididymis to here, those were just sperm cells, just the cells. But we know that ejaculate is a fluid secretion. And so that fluid that is going to be secreted with those sperm cells comes from the seminal vesicle as well as the prostate gland. All right, the final gland that's going to dump its contents in here is going to be this little guy right here. We've got two of those bulbourethral glands. All those do are going to secrete a mucus fluid that will help lubricate the urethra for those sperm, that's semen, because now we call it semen. When you have sperm plus fluid, that's semen. Now we're going to have easy exit, very smooth, kind of lubricates that the urethra to allow that to happen. The pH of that is about 7.5. Remember, we had those alkaline secretions in that semen. So the pH is about 7.5. The vaginal canal is acidic. So when you put those things together, you're only slightly acidic at that point, and the sperm can survive. There's 120 million sperm per mil, and with each ejaculation, there's anywhere from 2 to 5 mil. So you're ejaculating a ton of sperm with each ejaculation. Sperm are motile at this point, so they can swim. That fluid kind of helps them do that fructose to develop that ATP, allow that tail to move, that flagellum to flap. And sperm can live for weeks prior to ejaculation. So they can live for weeks up here in the epididymis. But once they are ejaculated, they can only live for about 6 days. So that is why fertilization, that fertile window, we're going to talk about that when we get to ovulation. But even if you're not ovulating, those sperm can still live in the reproductive tract. And if your ovulation occurs within that 6-day period of sperm that are viable, then you can get pregnant around that time of your ovulation, which is why if you do natural family planning and you're not on any type of birth control, you should avoid sexual intercourse for the couple days prior to your ovulation and the couple days post ovulation, just in case that ovulation occurs a little earlier or later. All right, so we have, let's see. Okay, so then I'm just going to go through the rest of this. I don't have a slide on it for some reason. I do want to finish up this though on the exit. So we're here, the bulbourethral gland dumps mucus into this urethra. This is the penile urethra. So this is just the main urethra that goes through the penis and then out through the external urethral opening. The urethra that's here, I think we talked about it during the urinary system, is called the membranous urethra. There we have a muscular smooth muscle, controlled opening. And basically what happens there, or skeletal rather, it's skeletal muscle because you can control it, it's voluntary. That is what allows men to control their urination, but it can also allow them to control their ejaculation. But once this relaxes, then the contents move out the penis. Okay, so accessory organs, the scrotum was the enclosure of the testes here. So right here, this is all scrotum that encloses the testes. That aids in heat regulation. Remember that sperm cannot live outside or cannot live inside the body because it's too warm. The penis, the purpose is to convey urine and semen. Its shape, its length, all of those things are there and important for proper delivery into the female reproductive tract of its contents. So we were made evolutionary to reproduce. And so everything is made with the thought that we are supposed to reproduce and produce gametes and pass on our genes. That's our evolutionary purpose. And so everything is designed according to that. Now, the body here has 2 types of erectile tissue. So we have, this is a cross section. It looks like it's only in the cross section here, but ultimately, here's the urethra here. And then here are the corpus cavernosa with some arteries going through them. So this is dorsal, this is ventral, which means this is the top, this is the bottom. So we're looking here. This is corpus spongiosum, which is this. That's one type of erectile tissue. The corpus spongiosum has the urethra going through it. So that's going to be this part with the urethra encircling it. So this is if we cut it in half. On top of that is going to have the corpus cavernosum, and there's one on each side. So this is just a cross section. So this just has one corpus cavernosa. The other side would have corpus cavernosa as well. Those have arteries going through them. Purpose of all of these blood vessels. When arousal happens, that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, that is going to increase blood flow to these arteries. and they're going to dilate, and that causes the erection to happen. These erectile tissues will harden, and that will cause the erection that you are all familiar with. Okay, so different types of erectile tissue: corpus spongiosum here, which has the urethra going through, corpus cavernosum here, which has blood vessels going through it. When those blood vessels become engorged, this erectile tissue will contract, and that will rise the penis. At the end of the penis, there's an enlargement that's called glans penis. That is mainly for stimulation, but that is where the external urethral orifice is, the exit of the urethra. Gentlemen are born with a prepuce, which is the foreskin. The purpose of the foreskin is to protect the glands from unnecessary stimulation. It is a very Western thing to remove that during circumcision. Some people do it for cosmetic reasons. Some people do it for cleanliness. If you do not keep that skin clean, you can harbor a lot of bacteria under there. And in fact, in men in other countries that do not practice regular circumcision, that have like an HIV epidemic, HIV can be transmitted in that area under the foreskin. And so be transmitted from person to person. So circumcision has kind of, I think, become a more cosmetic procedure, but it does have cleanliness purpose as well. Okay, so just kind of a recap on endocrinology here. You have to think way back to week 2. Remember, the hypothalamus secretes something called gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. Remember that gonadotropin releasing hormone tells the anterior pituitary gland to release the gonadotropins, which are FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. In males, luteinizing hormone is going to promote testosterone secretion from those interstitial cells. Remember that we need that testosterone to secrete to those seminiferous tubules to promote sperm development. Follicle stimulating hormone will proliferate those interstitial cells so that more testosterone can be released. And then that also triggers the sperm production from the stem cell into the mature spermatid. So remember that the hypothalamus is up in the brain, the anterior pituitary is up in the brain. Those things are released into the bloodstream. They will travel the bloodstream down to the testes and act on the testes. The interesting thing is that androgens like testosterone in females, this would be estrogen and progesterone, are going to kind of inhibit FSH and LH secretion. So those things would travel through the bloodstream and then tell the gonadotropin releasing hormone to shut off. Now, you guys had a case study week 2 about something like this. So the more testosterone injections that somebody takes, that tells the hypothalamus to shut off its gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will not promote FSH and LH to stimulate sperm production. So men who are on testosterone, high levels of testosterone supplements, are typically infertile because they're not doing this side. They're not doing the sperm development, which is really interesting. Testosterone is necessary, though, for muscular growth, the secondary sex characteristics, which are going to be body hair, the deepening of the voice, that type of stuff, muscular development, all of that. So that's all necessary during puberty, right? So testosterone needs to be released during puberty from those testes, but it depends upon this happening as well. So LH is necessary for testosterone production, but then once testosterone is released, then it has a negative feedback mechanism on the LH. So androgens, when we talk about androgens, I'm talking about testosterone in males. It's secreted by the testes. It's converted into dihydrotestosterone, which is another derivative of testosterone. And ultimately, this begins during fetal development of 8 weeks. So up until about 8 weeks to 10 weeks, fetuses do not have a sex assigned yet. Once that testosterone is beginning to be released, it's stimulated by the presence of a Y chromosome during meiosis. Then testosterone will trigger the descent the formation of testes in the abdominal cavity. And then that will drop during puberty. So some testosterone is released in the fetus. It definitely increases during puberty to cause a lot of developmental things to occur, necessary things to occur. All right, so that is the male reproductive system. In the next lecture, we will jump into the female reproductive system.